Born in storms on the open sea, waves do not have gentle beginnings. They are wild at birth. Through the discipline of wind and gravity, they are transformed into powerful rhythmic swells, traveling across thousands of miles to distant shores. As the swells enter the shallow coastal waters, they crest, and in one last dramatic moment display their power and beauty as they break onto the shores of their destination. It is here at the depth of the storm's energy that the surfer connects with the wave, using it to express himself, just as a painter uses the canvas or a dancer the stage. It is here, between the wind and the water, that man performs an intense duet with the sea.
The heart loves the shape of the wave, the feel of the wave, the beauty of that scene. And for me, it's always been primarily a deal of cruising in that wave, getting the free ride, getting the power of it, surfing without effort.
If I could speak through my surfing, then I really wouldn't have to say anything.
The richest heritage that you can have is a surfing heritage, and it's because we consume less, we travel more. We are the gypsies of the earth, and people love our lifestyle.
Surfing existed hundreds of years ago in Africa, South America, and the South Pacific. But it was in the Hawaiian Islands that surf riding developed into an art form of cultural importance. Reflecting the intimate connection that traditional Hawaiian culture had with the sea, surfing was called kanalu, a study of the wave. Through years of studying the ocean, a surfer grew to understand the patterns in the formation of waves and realized the natural harmony and rhythm in all things. It was in this rich context that classical Hawaiian surfing was born.
Style initially was these stately poses on these heavy wooden missiles hurtling towards the beach, and just these elegant, upright expressions of joy and poise, somewhat accentuated by standing straight and proud and being in control.
Tragically, this era of classical Hawaiian surf riding ended with the arrival of Europeans following in the footsteps of Captain Cook. They brought with them not only a new way of life, but disease as well. In a relatively short period of time, epidemics had wiped out nearly 90% of the Hawaiian population. By the late 1800s, the ancient sport of riding waves was almost extinct, practiced by only a handful of beach boys at Waikiki. But surfing would not die, and appropriately, it would be in Hawaiian, the legendary Duke Kahanamoku, who would lead the rebirth of this ancient art of riding waves.
There was never a greater man than Duke Kahanamoku. What more could you have in one human being, and no one will ever touch him again, ever?
He was a living legend, a god, and everybody respected him throughout the whole state as almost royalty.
The son of a Honolulu police captain, Duke was a world-class swimmer, winning medals in 4 Olympics. He was treated like royalty everywhere he went and became friends with Hollywood celebrities, even acting in films from time to time. His participation in swimming exhibitions drew large crowds throughout the United States and Europe. It was at these exhibitions that he demonstrated his ability in surfing and rekindled an international interest in this ancient Hawaiian sport, earning him the title, the father of modern surfing.
He was the man. He took surfing around the world. It's like Hawaii gave its gift to the world, and it was surfing, and Duke gave it to the world.
One of the young men influenced by the Duke was Tom Blake, a native of Wisconsin. After meeting the Duke in 1920, Blake was inspired to become a waterman, skilled in swimming, surfing, and all aspects of living near the ocean. Moving to the Hawaiian Islands in 1924, he became one of surfing's most influential designers and innovators. Fascinated with the Hawaiian roots of the sport, Blake researched the ancient board designs and then began to design his own. Since the redwood surfboards of the early 1900s weighed as much as 150 pounds, Blake designed hollow boards in an attempt to make them lighter. In 1935, he added a fin to the bottom end of a surfboard, which made the board more stable and easier to turn. In California, other surfers were making similar advances in surfboard design. One of these was Woody Brown from San Diego. A world champion glider pilot and seasoned sailor, Brown designed and built the first modern catamaran in the Western world. Still surfing at age 81, Brown continues to live a life closely connected with the sea. His experience as a glider pilot in the 1930s helped him see the similarities between an airplane wing and the rail of a surfboard. Known as Spider because of his thin physique and stance on the board, Brown applied this knowledge of aero and hydrodynamics to surfboard design and surfing technique.
I knew from my aerodynamics and the lift of an airplane wing that a curved surface will suck. So I realized that the curved side would hold up in the wave. So I rounded my edges, made them curved up forward. And then I put a little moon-shaped skeg. I never heard of skegs, but I figured that would help to hold it, which it did. Instead of standing up like the other guys did in one place and using their foot to turn, which was slow and clumsy, and they'd say, okay, everybody going right. And they'd all put their foot in and they'd slowly turn right. I'd turn right and then I'd go back over this guy and then I'd go back over this guy while they were gradually getting around. And I was just standing with 1 foot forward and 1 foot back and I wasn't using my foot at all. They thought I was kind of a little off, I was the Spider with his crazy new board, which later turned out to be more or less what we got today.
The trend towards lighter, more maneuverable boards took a huge step forward in the late 1940s when balsa wood surfboards were introduced in California. Balsa wood, however, was too weak by itself and was initially combined with redwood. To make them even lighter, a surfer from Pasadena, California, began making boards entirely of balsa wood, then covering them with a new material called fiberglass. Known for being a loner, Bob Simmons had studied aero and hydrodynamics at Caltech. He was considered by many to be an eccentric, mad scientist, but his ideas would forever change surfboard design. Injured in a bicycle accident, Simmons had a weak arm which made it difficult for him to paddle. Many say it was this disability that compelled him to design surfboards that were lighter and easier to maneuver.
In my mind, the one big contribution that Simmons made was that, he was a smart guy, he was a Caltech engineer, and he was the first guy to combine fiberglass with balsa wood. And that was a major deal because up to that time they were writing redwood boards, and balsa combinations of redwood. But the balsa by itself was too weak really to, to make a board out of. So when Simmons came along, he combined fiberglass with balsa wood, and then all hell broke loose because boards dropped from 80 and 100 pounds down to, 35, 40 pounds. And that's when things just went berserk because now you had a board that a guy in a short period of time, could be making major improvements on instead of a goddamn board that when you drug it to the beach, you got a double hernia.
In September 1954, tragedy struck off the coast of San Diego, California, at Windansea Beach.
Windansea was famous for kind of being a big wave spot. It just wasn't a place that you felt comfortable in just zipping down to do, but it was a place of legend.
It was on a Sunday, and he had come down to surf Windansea with a friend, Bev Morgan, from Los Angeles, because he knew that the waves were going to be huge. It was just a beautiful day, and it hadn't started getting big yet. But as the day went, the waves kept building. And I always remember someone saying, "Look, Simmons is body surfing," and actually turning around and seeing no one there. But we didn't think anything of it. And the board came in, and then, you know, it just got dark. Everybody at that point knew that, you know, it was all over.
By the mid-1950s, the pace of surfing's growth accelerated. More and more surfers were hitting the waves, and on the beaches of Southern California, they were speaking their own language, listening to their own music, and wearing their own distinctive dress.
There were all these clans of local guys that would travel together as a group from an area to go visit another area. The guys from Manhattan Beach would go to San Onofre. The guys from San Diego would come to San Onofre. Guys from Malibu would come to San Onofre. The San Onofre guys would go to Malibu. And these were like tribal villages visiting each other on these officious occasions.
In my case, you could go up and down the coast and you knew everybody either by name, or at least if not by name, by, you know, well enough to say, "Hi, how's it going?" because you recognize it.
There were pockets of surfing interest, Windansea, La Jolla area, San Onofre, Laguna area, on up the coast. So you could travel about anywhere on the coast and hook up with surfers. If you didn't know them, you'd sure know them fast.
The camaraderie between surfers was based on a common passion unknown to much of the general public. Against the larger societal push for conformity, which characterized the 1950s, the surfers' priority of riding waves was not warmly embraced by the mainstream establishment. Surfers like rockers and beatniks were viewed as rebels.
I think a lot of the surfers of the late 50s, their parents were children of the Depression. And so, like my father, he was conditioned to get a good job and keep it at all costs. And life was about being white-knuckled to an income. Well, as a surfer, it became apparent to us that those rules and that paranoia might not necessarily be worth worshiping for the rest of our lives. So we threw off the values of our parents, and we assumed all these postures which were the antithesis of our parents' values, saying, look, all your rules are theoretical constructs. They're not necessarily the real rules. Now we're making up our own rules here, and they're really just as good as your rules, and we're going to follow those and see where they take us.
There was no conventional way of looking at anything, and so everybody seemed to have their own approach to just about everything, and that was the element that kind of bonded everybody together. There was no magazine to go to, there were no movies to say you should act this way or that way, or you should dress this way or that way. And it was like everybody was just kind of winging it, and they kind of all had their own approach to life.
Many of these surfers were not like deadbeat beach bums, but they were like intellectuals that were captured by the aesthetic of the one-on-one with nature aspect of surfing.
We were really a non-materialistic group as a group. You know, if you wanted a surfboard, they'd come to your house and say, okay, we're we're going to build a surfboard, and they just go to work right in the garage, you know. And of course, the parents would be all upset because there'd be dust and, you know, shavings and everything, and then there'd probably be, you know, maybe a party that went along with it, you know. And it was like what was mine was yours, and what was yours was mine, and there was that spirit of giving that came over from Hawaii.
Hawaiians can be the most big-hearted people in the world. They have so much to give that, well, that's what happened. The missionaries came over there, they gave it all away. The Haoles took, the Hawaiians gave, and now they got nothing, and it's a sad situation, but they're very special people. They always have been to me, and some of my very best friends are still Hawaiians.
It's the people in Hawaii that make it real special, and it's the aloha that they have, and the aloha that they probably taught a lot of other people.
The Hawaiian people, my people, are the minority group in our own land. It's not that we're regretting it or nothing, you know, it's done. It's history, and the only thing about it is that the influx of people that come here and stay here and then leave, and more people come. It's just, if they all came and stayed, then the culture and the islands would grow into them, and then they would finally realize the message of the culture.
The aloha spirit is real simple. You give and you give and you give and you give and you give from here until you have nothing else to give.
Surfing in Waikiki when I grew up used to be nice and free. Hardly anybody out in the surf. You can count the heads out there. It's not like the modern day surfing where you see about 1 million guys out in the surf, everybody trying to dog eat dog. But there, the surf is just all for you, just waiting for you every wave. In the Hawaiian style back there, we used to have a lot of respect for each other. You get so much fun watching the other guy, and same time we try to outdo each other. I go in with a wave that maybe say like a perfect, maybe a 10. Another guy come out and he do better than I.
Well, in those days, surfing, whoever was sitting on the inside of the curl, you know, the furthest guy in the hook, he had the right of way. And when he caught the wave, why, everybody else backed off and let him have it. Or if we were all sitting together, we'd say, okay, you take this one, I'll get the next one. You know what I mean? It was a real friendly aloha sort of thing.
Our relationship with one another, it's more like a buddy system. We get out like with the big waves when we were kids. We watch after one another. And anybody's in trouble, find about 2, 3 guys, get him, one guy pick him up, tan him in, get his board and come back out. And that's how we used to surf in our style, our time.
We used to sit out there and say, oh, I wish somebody else would come out. It was lonely out there in that blue water by yourself, you know. Then a surfer, you were just happy to see him. He was another brother, pal, you know, that was enjoying it along with you. And your enjoyment of surfing, you know, grows with more guys surfing. See, now they lose sight of that today because it's too competitive and so many guys, see. But actually, basically, when the guy comes out and surfs with you, your enjoyment is doubled.
Wave sharing. That's the olden style.
During the early 1950s, a few California surfers began making the annual pilgrimage to ride the big winter surf of Hawaii. Living in tents and surviving on fish, rice, and the hospitality of the Hawaiians, these surfers would be some of the first to ride the huge waves at Makaha, Sunset, and the infamous Waimea. Waimea Bay lies on the north shore of Oahu. Most of the year, its waters are tranquil, a good place for swimming and diving. But a few times each winter, the serenity of the bay is shattered as huge swells explode on its deep water reefs.
People really didn't know it was going to happen. There weren't that many people that had ridden those waves, and you really thought you were going to die back then. Now you can look back and say, well, you know, thousands of people have ridden this particular wave, and they usually don't die. But back then, you know, you didn't really know.
For many years, it was believed that the waves of Waimea were too big and powerful to surf. To Hawaiians and Californians alike, it seemed an ominous, mystical place.
There was an old haunted house at the base of the hill. There was some Hawaiian burial grounds at overlooking the cliff there. And of all things, there was a church there close to the point. And you just didn't know if you're going to go out there and it's just a one-way ticket.
The first surfers to experience the power of Waimea Bay were Woody Brown and Dickie Cross. Woody was an experienced big wave surfer, and Dickie was young and aggressive, eager to try anything. In the winter of 1943, they were attempting to surf huge waves at Sunset Beach. The waves kept building in size until they became too dangerous to ride. Trapped outside the surf, Woody and Dickie were unable to come into shore. In desperation, they paddled 5 miles down the coast to Waimea Bay, hoping to find a safe channel to shore.
I'm watching the first one coming, and it's getting bigger and it's getting steeper as it comes in, and finally it's getting a little white along the top, you know. Oh, when it got about, maybe 50 or 100 feet from me, I realized, buddy, you ain't gonna make it. I can't express the feeling because those waves couldn't live through them, so I figured I'm dead, you know. Anyway, I paddled until I could see it getting ready to break, so I just shoved the board and headed for bottom. And I'm going down the blue water until my ears, I can hardly stand it. But luckily, they broke in the same place every time, so I was out, see? So after the set went by, then I started looking for Dickie, because he'd been right inside of me, you know. And I hollered and I waved and I looked, and I couldn't see him anywhere. No sign of boards or Dickie or anything. So that's the story of Dickie Cross. They never found anything, never found his body at all.
Experienced surfers measure big waves not in feet, but in increments of fear. And after the death of Dickie Cross, it seemed that Waimea Bay would remain unridden forever. But surfers continued to contemplate these waves, seduced by their beauty and power. On November 5th, 1957, a handful of surfers paddled out at Waimea and into surfing history. Greg Knoll, Mickey Munoz, and a few others became the first persons to surf the waves of Waimea Bay and survive.
Mickey was there with me that first day, and Mike Stang and Bing Copeland and a number of other guys. Pat Kern was there, and we won't get into who rode the first wave or who did this or whatever, but our butts were puckering a little bit when we walked down the beach with boards under our arms. And we went out and caught a few waves, and I looked over and across the way there. It was kind of interesting. There must have been 100 people from Haleiwa had got the word that the Crazy Hollies were committing suicide at Waimea Bay, and the cliff on the opposite side was lined with local people, you know, sitting in their cars waiting for somebody to drown.
Greg Knoll rode waves so massive that he came to be known as the Bull. His black and white striped trunks became a trademark. And in 1969 at Makaha Beach, he rode the largest wave that had ever been surfed.
Modern big wave riding began with Greg Knoll. He'll tell you different, but that's when it began. You know, it began with his group of guys in the, what was it, late 50s and early 60s, where they were just trying to charge harder and harder and harder. And he'll say that we're doing things differently or whatever, we're churning a little bit better. But reality is, when it's huge, all you're doing is taking off on the biggest wave you can find. You're not going to do a bottom churn or pull into a barrel. You're just trying to catch a huge wave. The problem with riding really, really big waves is there's a lot of water moving up. So here's the wave and it breaks like that, and all this water's going like this. And for me, to get down it, you know, I use gravity and I use my own muscle power. But my own muscle power and gravity on a 30-foot wave doesn't really equate to getting down this massive wall of water that's moving up. And that's the hardest thing about riding a really, really big wave, catching it.
To me, being a big wave surfer is about 20 years of water time in the ocean, man. Surfing every day. I mean, to get to a point of being a big wave rider, you're gonna grow and mature through so many changes. Your body changes, your mind changes, and then the size of waves that you ride change. Once a person gets to that peak, you're on another level where it's not a competitive thing, it's a brotherhood.
The elite of big wave riders surf waves as large as 4-story buildings. During the early years of big wave riding, surfers concentrated on survival. This conservative approach was radically challenged by a surfer named Butch Van Artstalen at a place known as the Banzai Pipeline. Located near Waimea Bay in Hawaii, the pipeline has some of the most beautiful and dangerous waves in the surfing world. Winter storm swells rising out of deep water suddenly encounter a shallow, jagged reef. This collision of natural forces creates a wave that is extremely powerful, steep, and hollow like a pipe. Because of the deadly reef, which lies just a few feet below the water's surface, no one attempted to surf pipeline until 1961. That first year, surfers rode the waves cautiously, the goal being to get out of the wave alive. Then Butch appeared on the scene and changed the way pipeline was surfed. From La Jolla, California, Butch was an athlete known for his hot temper, gentle heart, and aggressive surfing. Fully aware of the dangers of the pipeline, Butch would drop down the steep face of the breaking wave, deliberately stall, and maneuver his board into the curl, surfing closer to the power of the wave than anyone before him. Most surfers thought Butch was fearless.
I remember Butch, when he first went over, he hit a small board, you know, thinking that he could just kind of, well, I don't seem to have the right equipment, so I guess I don't have to ride today. And he said he walked down to the beach at Waimea Bay and the waves are about 25 feet. And he walked up behind Pat Kern, who was sitting next to this board that he'd spent months on, this beautiful piece of artwork that he obviously wouldn't let anybody use. So Butch felt really safe in walking up behind Pat and asking, hey, Pat, think I can borrow your board? And Pat just said, yep, without even turning around or looking at Butch. And Butch said he'd never felt so sick in his life.
Quite a few memories stand out as significant occurrences in my surfing career. But one was about Butch Van Artstalen at Pipeline. All the heroes were there that day, and Pipeline was about 10 to 12 feet on the inside reef. Butch went out and rode Pipeline for the first time, more than just survived it, he dominated it. And this was a wave that heretofore people had thought it was not possible to ride it that way. It was not possible to dominate pipeline. You could merely survive it at best. And I remember one wave that Butch dropped in on, and Falls came over and covered it. You'd see him streaking along inside. And all of a sudden, Butch came shooting out of the tube in the spit, and the whole beach was standing up and cheering. It was just like one of those moments that was like magic, and Butch was the first master of the pipeline. And that was the day he became the master.
Those who knew Butch best remember not only his aggressive surfing, but his kindness and generosity, his aloha spirit. Sadly, life on the beach proved more challenging for Butch. He died at the age of 37 from complications of alcohol abuse. As surfing continued to evolve, so did the surfer's instrument, the surfboard. In garages and backyards throughout California, Hawaii, and Australia, shapers created new designs with ever more advanced technology and materials. In the late 1950s, balsa wood was replaced by polyurethane foam, which remains in use to this day.
A lot of people still don't realize that surfboards are pretty much hand-built from start to finish, and everyone's unique. When I start to work on a surfboard, I sort of have a rough concept of what the board's intended to do. But as I get farther along in the shaping process and the board starts to take shape, there's a lot of visualization of how the board's going to perform and fit into the wave and react to the rider. I measure a lot, there's a lot of control, but then the other aspect of it is sort of the artist in me, and the whole thing has got to flow and come together.
I look at a board as if I'm the water traveling across the board. Other shapers look at the board traveling across the water. We probably end up in the same place, but it's just a different way of looking at it.
Shaping is actually a real basic form of sculpture. In fact, it's getting more that way all the time because boards are becoming much more intricate. Originally, they were so basic, all you did was flatten them out or thin them out and put on the rails, but now you have concaves and V's and wings, and so it's a much more intricate sculpture form than it used to be, but basically it's just a form of sculpture.
It's a custom art, and it's something that's done for the individual generally. And each shaper, of course, has their ego and their pride that they put into the boards, but basically you're shaping it for a customer, for a particular style of surfing and type of wave.
How big is it?
6'5" or 6'6".
6'5", okay.
How wide is your board?
My boards are like 18 and
okay, well this is
19.
This is just under 18.
Let's start with a big and then scale down. That way I can feel it a little bit better.
Okay. Okay, what's the main difference between this board and your board, your personal board?
The one I ride is wider and shorter.
It's a
and
little
has
shorter.
and has smaller fins and is a swallowtail. This board did nice cutbacks, but I tend to shy away from the pintails because I find that when there's a corner at the end, I can feel the end of the tail. And if I can feel the end of the tail, then I know how far I can go. Whereas these, I can't feel the end of the tail because the curve keeps going, the rail keeps continuing to the point there.
So for vertical or not, you don't think they're as good?
I don't like them.
There has always been a direct and intimate relationship between surfboard design and a surfer's style. One of the best expressions of this relationship was in the late 1950s, when lighter, more maneuverable boards allowed surfers more freedom in riding waves. Surfing became a very individual expression of one's personality and relationship with the ocean.
In the old days, I could roll up and look out the window and see guys surfing, and I could be as much as, a quarter mile away. As long as I could see a basic image, I could tell you whether it was Mickey Munoz, Mickey Dora, Phil Edwards, and I could keep going right down the line for a half hour. And the reason for that was that each one of these guys had a very exact style, the way that they rode.
Just all the fabulous characters that evolved out of that period lent a great sense of color and distinctiveness to the sport. And these were characters that were each unique from each other. About this time, you have things happening in the evolution of style like Mickey Dora and Phil Edwards. Mickey Dora from Hollywood, Beverly Hills, Malibu, the Black Knight of surfing. And Phil Edwards from Oceanside, California. Dora's dark and swarthy and very Hollywood, and Phil is blonde and light and fair and the White Knight.
Mickey Dora's footwork on the surfboard earned him the name Da Cat, while Phil Edwards was known for his powerful turns and elegant poses. Both men contributed to the golden age of style during the late 1950s and early 60s. But it was Phil Edwards who was considered the greatest stylist in surfing history.
Phil Edwards was the first surfer that anyone said was the best in the world. And all of a sudden everyone got this idea that Phil Edwards was Mr. Style and Mr. Grace. But if you go back and watch him surf in those movies and you watch closely, he was a power surfer. You know, he would crank turns and put his board up on a rail, but he was riding a 40-pound balsa board. But he was a powerful, radical surfer.
You'd be driving into San Onofre and you'd see someone riding in a distant peak and you'd go, oh, that's Phil Edwards. You could just tell by his body English and his style. It was unique who he was, and he'd be out amongst 20 or 30 people. So style was a real individual, important, distinctive, proud part of the sport through the 50s and 60s.
The era of post-war surfing didn't really last very long. I mean, that beautiful, what people look back nostalgically, that wonderful time, that, the golden years of surfing, where you knew every surfer within 100 miles, and where, each day you learned something new, and where it was a totally personal thing. In those days, there was no competition for waves. Can you imagine how your imagination could run free if every wave you wanted was yours, if the whole relationship with the sport was you and the wave? And that era, that's what they experienced on the coast. I mean, new spots, new surfboards, and tinged with that little sort of, that rebel lifestyle. And, it must have been a glorious time. If you want to construct an accurate timeline of surfing, you'd probably start with the Duke at the turn of the century, and then the next big epoch started with Gidget. A young girl from the valley wanted to learn how to surf, thought, hey, why can't I surf? And that really was the most influential moment, I think, in the whole history of the sport, where someone from the outside looked out there at those bronze gods and said, hey, I want to surf, why can't I surf? Why shouldn't I be able to do that? And that's where, it changed forever from that point on.
Based on the surfing adventures of a young girl at Malibu Beach, the hit movie Gidget was released in 1959 and exposed millions to the surfing lifestyle.
Within one season, surfers, their whole world had changed. I can't even imagine what that must have been like, to be one of 15, 20, 30 guys at Surfing Malibu, and then the next summer, there's 100 people out there. It must have been shocking. But in a sense, that's what created surfing. I mean, where all of a sudden everyone, they went, wow, this is fantastic. They got that feeling, they got that stoke, And in a way, something died, but in the same way, something was born. The whole beach and surfing culture was born.
As Hollywood continued to produce movies such as Beach Blanket Bingo and Ride the Wild Surf, an independent filmmaker named Bruce Brown released the first true blockbuster surf film. In 1966, The Endless Summer came out, a documentary about two surfers traveling the world in search of the perfect wave. In contrast to the Hollywood movies, The Endless Summer realistically portrayed the surfing lifestyle, capturing the imaginations of a generation. While surf movies were enjoying popularity, the music of surfing subculture began to reverberate up and down Southern California's coast. Young people packed ballrooms and armories listening to groups such as the Shantays, the Surfaris, and the original creator of surf music, Dick Dale and the Deltones. Expressing his experience of surfing, Dick Dale played a new guitar sound that was intense, rhythmic, and driving, earning him the title King of the Surf Guitar.
Well, the true surfer, the real surfer, was not a person of insecurities. He wasn't a person who spoke about other people. He wasn't a person who was jealous. He wasn't a person who had greed. He was part of earth. He was like the monk who goes to the mountaintop. The true surfer only lived for one thing, to make his pact with water. And don't mess with the water, because it'll snuff you in a second. And I felt it with my guitar, so when I would do my big slides, I go, that kind of a slide. That was the big bottom wave sucking you up over. And when I'd go through the tube, I could put my finger inside and here go, tss, and I could hear the tickety over the top of my head, and I would get off.
Movies and music were exposing millions to the surfing lifestyle. By the mid-1960s, surfing had become synonymous with the romanticized ideal of the California life, a lifestyle that millions wanted to emulate.
Surfing was no longer a beach thing. You started getting parents and wannabes and people that didn't even know what surfing was, had never seen a surfboard, wanting to identify with the lifestyle.
This popular interest in surfing provided the foundation for perhaps the most influential development in modern surfing, the surfing lifestyle as a commodity. While surfing evolved with new surfboards and new styles, businesses interested in profit began to develop alongside the surfing scene. In order to publicize surfing and advertise their merchandise, some companies began sponsoring surfers in surfing contests. This influx of money from big business began to change the nature and identity of surfing.
In the early days of surfboard manufacturing and the sport through the 50s into the early 60s, the surfers that were dictating style were ones that were creating the actual boards, and the surfers that were riding those boards were the ones that other surfers emulated. So that was setting the style. With the advent of competitions and the growth in competitions, all of a sudden those surfers who were really good became the top competitors as well. And as they became the top competitors, those surfers began to set and dictate the course of style. And then as that progressed towards the late 60s, prize money began to enter into the picture. And with that, the nature of competition changed. Instead of just the glory and the honor of winning, it was like all of a sudden you could get a paycheck out of this deal.
Today, there's some tremendous money being earned by these young guys. I mean, not relative to, baseball or football or, but these kids are earning $100 grand a year going surfing, I mean, we could only dream of that.
Professional surfing has brought fame and fortune to some talented surfers, offering them a life never possible before big money began to support surfing contests. One of these top young competitors was Brad Gerlach, who was ranked number 2 in the 1991 World Surfing Tour. Considered a leading contender for the 1992 world title, Brad stunned the surfing world by dropping out of professional competition.
The main thing with surfing contests was, you know, it's like being a musician and only playing rock and roll for 30 years or something like that. I mean, you want to start moving into jazz or, you know, alternative. You want to keep moving forward so that you have this freshness in everything you do. And so for me, in order to have freshness in my act, I needed to sort of secede from the tour and sort of carry on in my own path.
While professional competition has brought tremendous amounts of money into surfing, some surfers argue that this emphasis on competition and money threatens the very heart and spirit of this ancient sport.
Surfing is totally an art and totally subjective. There's very little objectivity in it. And the professional surfing competition has tried to make it as objective as possible.
Everybody knows the story of the guy who totally rips but can't put himself together for contests. And that poor guy is, you know, he's going to end up never getting a chance to really show people that, you know, he could blow these other guys that do well in contests away by, you know, by sheer, pure talent.
But the standard under which we're measured is the results on the sports pages. I mean, you know, the man who holds up the trophy ultimately will be remembered. The person who doesn't won't.
When you have a set of rules that you got to play by and you have surfers trying to conform to that to please judges, what you end up with is some great surfers, no doubt about it, but you have kind of a style that ends up being a bit on the clone-ish side in order to please judges, in order to score points, you know.
It's like if you said, all right, you can only paint with oils. That's it, no sculptures, no watercolors. I'm sorry, sure, it's beautiful what you did there, but we're not scoring that stuff, man.
It's good for the sport that the best guys in the world get together and try to kick each other's butt. It only forces it to go faster, better, quicker, higher, however you want to look at it.
There's probably at least a couple of million avid surfers in the world. How many of those people enter surf contests? Maybe 1,000 or 2,000 total. So obviously it's a very small percentage of the universe of surfers in the world that actually enter surf contests. But if you look at surf publications, 95% of the photos that are published in them are of surfers that ride in surf contests. So how does that relate to the reality of the everyday experience? I don't think it does.
Although surf contests draw large crowds and attention, the experience of surfing remains an individual one. Each surfer chooses his or her relationship to the wave.
Surfing is a dance form on a liquid stage, and the stage is always changing, always involved, and learning to surf is learning to articulate the board and learning wave knowledge, which allows you to coincide with the ocean, and then it becomes a dance form, an accomplished dance form.
I've always had an affinity with surfing and music or rock and roll, you know, because the surfboard is the instrument and the wave is the canvas or what you play it on. And it's the same thing. A musician sits down and he plays a riff, you know, and everyone's different. It'll never be the same. It's impossible. Same thing with surfing. No two waves are ever the same, and you will never ride any wave the same way.
The way I like to surf is where you're trying to feel the power of the wave and glide along. kind of like a pelican soaring along a wave. He doesn't actually touch the wave, but he uses the updraft and the wind on the wave to glide along.
I'm not really trying to rip, tear, and destroy the waves. I'm trying to just add to the beauty of the wave. If you saw a perfect peeling wave, what I would like to do is just add to the beauty so then the people would just go, wow, that was a really beautiful wave.
Despite the crowded waters and debates about professional surfing, this ancient Hawaiian sport has brought to the modern world a unique outlook and spirit, which still reflects a strong connection with the ocean.
If you look at the history of surfing, it began in Hawaii with the Polynesians, and surfing was very connected to the lifestyle and to the culture of surfing. It was a ritual activity. It was connected to the ocean as sacred wilderness. And now as surfing has progressed over the years, it's gone through different waves of development. And now environmentalism is a key part of returning the sport back to its roots and letting surfers involve themselves into the saving of the ecology from which they came, our Mother Ocean.
Surfers are almost like talking fish. You know, the fish can't really come out and go, what are you guys doing, dumping all this stuff in the ocean? But the surfers are like, we live in that stuff, and anytime a plastic bag comes floating down or whatever, it just reminds you of where you're at. Every single time you see any sort of trash in the water, it just reminds you, oh yeah, I'm only 100 yards from shore.
Before surfing, we did not have a metaphor for how to deal with everything. And in our schools, we're taught a lot of competition. But we're not taught too much to go out in nature and respond to nature. And what has happened as a result is that, for the most part, mankind is holding on to all this crap. We built these buildings. We got sucked into that Three Little Pig story with the guys that built the pigs that built the brick house and didn't let it blow down. Then got to live like pigs for the rest of their life.
Surfers are the first people to recognize the fact that something's happening in the environment. And the salt water, our oceans, are like the blood that unites one family.
The ocean is our life source here for people like myself and people throughout Hawaii. And when that life source ceases, I think so will we.
People that don't surf, they have trouble understanding what surfing's all about. And over the years, I've had the question asked, 100 times, what's the deal? What's this thing? Why do people get so committed to surfing? I think the difference between surfing and other sports is that it's a lifestyle. It becomes part of your life, I think you go to the grave with that commitment.
I'm sitting out there alone, and I'm watching the waves, and I'm looking around the water, and I'm going, you know what? This is where it's at. This is what I need, this yoga of sitting and meditating and waiting for the wave. Then I realized that surfing for me was the process of surfing, not the wave riding itself. That was only the icing on the cake. The real meat of surfing is living life.
Surfing is a gift from an ancient culture that loved the sea. While surfing has experienced many transformations, its essence remains unchanged, an intimate relationship with nature. Ultimately, surfing is not only about riding waves, it's about seeking a connection with life. Once a surfer, you're never alone. Each time you return to the sea, you're with friends. The Duke and the Waikiki Beach Boys, Tom Blake, Bob Simmons, and countless others are with you. carefully watching the horizon for the first sign of an approaching set of waves. And as long as storms blow across the open sea, the waves will come.